All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zach Weingarten with TrialAssure, and I'm excited to talk about how artificial intelligence can be used within the realm of plain language summaries. It's a topic I find very interesting and exciting. Hopefully some of you do too. So let me just set the stage, bear with me. I know probably most of you are very familiar with plain language summaries, obviously. But what is a plain language summary, really? It's best thought of as a communication tool. It's a summary of the trial results for a plain language lay audience. Trial participants, prospective participants, public at large, providing them with the results of the trial design, what it was intended to research, and provided in a way that can be understood by various different types of people, different languages, and it's a difficult document to really put together in a consistent and effective way, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. For context, also for the purposes of this discussion, I'm talking about the standalone plain language summary of the trial results, as opposed to a plain language summary of the informed consent form or the section that might go into publication. But some of the concepts may also apply to those other use cases. And so what is artificial intelligence? This is a term that kind of gets thrown around a lot. It's a very broad term. It can mean a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different subsets of artificial intelligence. Now, we see it everywhere in our everyday lives, and maybe even aren't aware that that we're interacting with it at any given time. But you see it in your Alexa or your Siri, for example. Vehicle sensors, self-driving cars, or even just the sensors that you might have to alert you of traffic and other obstacles, medical device wearables, and the list goes on and on and on. It can take many different forms, and these aren't isolated silos of artificial intelligence, but rather different components that often overlap, often have aligned objectives, and can be used in conjunction with each other in various different ways. So some examples, and again, certainly not a comprehensive list here, but some of the common ones are machine learning, for example, which is the idea that an AI algorithm can learn and improve based on the outcome of what it previously did. So without having a person have to specifically program or prescribe future decisions, the system itself can assess what factors led it to this outcome and determine, was this correct or not, and try to learn and improve and make better decisions in the future on its own. There's different types of machine learning, a lot that goes into that, but at a high level, that's what that means. Language models, and this has been like ChatGPT, Bing, for example, has been in the public eye recently. So very exciting and new developments in this area, where essentially a person can go and have a conversation with an AI entity that, depending on how that entity is trained, it can produce information in a readable format. It can understand very well questions that you ask it contextually. So we'll get into this a little bit more detail, and we'll assess how ready is this technology in this context. Is it ready for prime time yet, or are there still some challenges and hurdles that need to be worked through? You have neural networks and deep learning, so that's more of a system where you have different nodes, and it's really sort of inspired by the way the human brain operates, and it's useful for very complex systems with many different factors, things like predicting weather patterns, stock market, things of that nature. And natural language processing is the fundamental idea of the computer to be able to look at text, understand it in a way that incorporates context, which has historically been something that computers have been it's been very difficult for them to do compared to a human. It's second nature to any of us to read something and kind of understand contextually what that means. But it's only been very recently that we've really begun to start to get there with some of these AI applications. The other important thing to keep in mind is this is continually evolving, and it evolves fast, and it will continue to do so. New strategies will continue to come out. The ones that exist will continue to evolve. So when I kind of thought about this, it helped me to sort of think about, in the context of plain language summaries and applying some of these concepts of automation and AI, really into three different buckets. Are we improving the accuracy of the document, the efficiency of producing the document, or the consistency in which these documents are created? And with consistency, I mean both across all your documents for the same organization, so that the audience is getting a consistent approach if they're reading one trial and then going on to another, but also consistency and adherence with the best practices with plain language summaries that are out there and that are continuing to evolve. But making sure that those are also being taken into consideration when these documents are developed. So we're going to kind of go through a few different ways that technology, AI, and automation can help to create or draft plain language summaries, and some of them will fall into these categories. They might touch on multiple different things, and we're going to discuss some of the advantages or maybe challenges with each of them. So let's talk about accuracy first. So the main objective with accuracy, obviously, is to ensure the integrity of the information in the document. And one way to do that is to pull data from different sources that are already available. For example, your protocol, clinical study report might be an unstructured document. You might have more structured data that you can utilize: listings, clinicaltrials.gov records, other systems, as well as a combination of these different sources. So where does AI come in here? It can come in, first off, with unstructured documents with natural language processing. It also can come into play if you have multiple different sources that you're utilizing and need to determine which is the source of truth. If you have a discrepancy in your data, where, what is the source that we're going to use and why? And that's the kind of thing that a computer could be very good at picking up user trends. A user picks, we're using this data, or we're manipulating this piece of information in a certain way. The computer can learn, why did the user do that? What were the factors that led them to choose this system over this one, and provide better suggestions moving forward. So when evaluating what data sources to use for this purpose, a few things you want to consider is, first, the accuracy. What is going to be the best source of truth? What format is the data in? What's going to be best aligned to what you want to put in the plain language summary? What's going to be available, both technically, is it a system that you can send this information, draw this information from, but also just from a timeline perspective. Is your clinical study report, for example, going to be ready at the point in time when you're initiating this document? These are all things that have to be considered. So let's look at a very basic example of what this looks like in practice. So here we've got a pretty basic list of adverse events and the numbers, and then what the algorithm could do is analyze the top adverse events, determine how many we're going to display based on this information. It might be maybe the top 5. It might be anything over X percent. Different factors that might go into play in making that determination. Convert these terms from medical or scientific terms into lay versions of these terms, and then even write text that corresponds to this data. So in this pretty simple example, it could produce a chart like this, filled in with some lay terms and the corresponding numbers, and you can even imagine how it might be able to write a sentence that even summarizes this with the figures and percentages and so forth. So let's move on into consistency. So like I mentioned before, there's a few different branches of consistency that are important. Consistent language, so using terms that are going to be consistent and understandable to the lay audience. So it's important to have a lay term glossary that your tool can reference and pull from, as well as common phrases. So if you frequently define something like what a placebo is, for example, you may already have a definition, a wording that you can use consistently in all of your documents. Consistent style, so a template that is consistent with the proper branding, colors, and consistency with your visual aids, using similar icons, similar formats, and design like that. And then consistency with adherence to best practices. So just a few examples on here. Ensuring accessibility, like in the context of, maybe an audience that, visually impaired, maybe colorblind. Do the colors have enough adequate contrast to make sure that it's going to meet their needs? Making sure that the document achieves a appropriate level of readability and understandability. So the difference between these two concepts is, readability currently is measurable. You look at number of, letters in a word, words in a sentence, sentences in a paragraph, and come up with a number that's a score. And there's various different algorithms out there that do this already. Understandability, although, takes a more subjective look at it, and you need to consider, is the reader going to actually understand this information? It may have a very good readability score, but understandability could be something totally different. That's where it's, lay review panels come into play, so that they can provide some feedback on how understandable this information was. That could be something that an artificial intelligence NLP algorithm could provide some insight into. I don't know if it would ever totally be able to measure it or quantify it really, but it could provide some suggestions and insight for someone writing this document. Other things here that are just common best practices, like searching for promotional language, making sure there's active voice, good grammar, adequate font size, and so forth. So here's an example of consistency when it comes to auto-generating a graphic, or at least getting one started for someone who can then kind of run with it. So in this example, we're looking at the participant flow section from clinicaltrials.gov information, and the system can analyze this and populate a flow chart that illustrates the trial design. Can utilize a pre-set up icon library for consistency in your template, and then allow the user to make adjustments from there and learn from those adjustments from the user. So produce something like that based on the data, and get the user at least started with a preset sort of template that then the user can modify and improve upon. And then efficiency is the third thing. So how can AI really help to make this a faster, more efficient process, so less time needs to be spent on some of the more maybe tedious activities with creating these documents, and the writers can focus on really the most important aspects. So simple one, auto-populating some text placeholders with data. That's pretty straightforward. Augmenting the drafting process with some of these AI techniques. So some of the things I just mentioned, but maybe also incorporating a writing element where the AI can utilize natural language generation, kind of like similar to ChatGPT in a way, to give the writer maybe a starting point or to review what the writer has already written. And then also embedding language translation into the process as well. So it's important to translate this document into all of the languages in which you have participants in this trial so that they can all obviously read it and understand it too. So that's an important process. It's very difficult to automate that from a computerized program. You can't exactly just throw these into Google Translate and expect a good result. It needs to be, the core concept of this document needs to be understandable to people in those who speak those languages, and it's recommended to have a fluent speakers review and conduct those translations. That being said, there is a possibility of taking a hybrid approach where you have a combination of both review panels, but also an AI augmented translation mechanism. Assessing the need for the lay panel to review as well. This is common practice in the first draft before it gets translated, but to have a set of folks who are representative of the study demographics to review it and provide some feedback. I mentioned before, AI might have a role up front to try to help mitigate some of the understandability concerns, but nevertheless, this is still an important part of the process. And AI, in sort of a different capacity, could help to determine, based on what factors of your demographics do you have, what process might you want to follow here? Is the review panel going to be recommended? How many people should be in it? And then even initiate the process of interacting with maybe a partner that assists to put the panel together and move it forward. Finalizing the document and then also distributing it, making sure that the participants in the trial are actually going to be able to access the document, obviously is very important. If they can't find it or don't receive it, then there's no real point in the first place. So that can also be assessed based on characteristics of your trial, or assessing documents that you've put out there already. Are they being accessed? Who's accessing them? What factors are there that may be limiting people from being able to find them, if that might be the case? So you could take a multifaceted approach to language translation, transfer into additional formats. So this could also help in some cases, you can create a short video snippet or an audio file. Might be useful maybe more if you have a pediatric audience, for example, something more kid-friendly. There's a lot of creative ideas out there on how to do different types of media. And then distributing it to them, whether it's an email integrating with, some kind of searchable platform that's out there. Many sponsors post them on their own websites to be searchable, or a platform like trialresults.com so that they can be found online. So let's talk a little bit about natural language processing and how can this really play a role. And this is kind of the part that I think is really cool and new, but let's maybe take a measured approach and a realistic one at looking at this. So two kind of models in mind, right? You could have the system produce some text, read its sources, produce a lay version of a summary of the trial. Or you could have the AI kind of act as a reviewer, have the writer take that step, and then a natural language processing mechanism could look at it and then maybe point out some parts where, maybe this sentence can be rewritten or something like that. So one of the important concepts here is prompt engineering. So when you interact with something like a natural language processing engine, you have to give it a prompt to tell it what to do. So this is where it's important to find depending on what I'm doing, what is the optimal instructions to give to this AI so that it returns something accurate what you want. So this is something that continues to evolve and continue to optimize, as depending on what exactly you're doing, what you're trying to get out of it. You want to give it the optimal statement or set of instructions that accompany the input data. So here's kind of a fun example. So we took some results just out of some from a random study in the public domain, and in this case, just threw it through ChatGPT with a very simple prompt. I probably wouldn't recommend this exact approach in actual practice, but I think it was a good example that kind of illustrates both the potential and some of the limitations that you might run into. So you feed it with a prompt such as summarize this information at a 6th grade reading level. And then it could insert that summary into a segment of the document. So we're taking kind of a modular approach here where maybe we've developed charts and graphics in other places, but then we have a section where we're going to put a summarization of this information. So you can see it, at face value, it looks like it did pretty well. It's legible. It's definitely a low, more maybe high level summary of this information. It picked out a few percentages to use. It even rounded them to no significant digits. So did okay. But if you look at it in a little bit more detail, you would find some problems. So it can tend to make conclusions on the information that may be not true, and it'll present them as if it's fact. So that's a challenge with ChatGPT inherently in the way that it's designed. It's not really designed for this purpose. There may be in the future other developments that might be more appropriate for this use case, but still, that's going to always be a potential challenge. So, risks and challenges with this approach. So yeah, the AI might interpret it incorrectly, draw misleading or false conclusions, and sort of make these statements and appear very confident about those conclusions that it's drawn. So important to mitigate for that or correct it. It might not write at the appropriate reading level. I would say that text was good, but may have been still a little bit maybe too advanced and needed to be simplified further. I'm not a plain language summary writer, but I think there could be some improvements there. That's something that you can certainly iterate, right? You could say, take it down on another level. It could use inappropriate or incorrect terminology, of course. So it's at the end of the day, it's basing what it's producing off of what it's been fed before. It's basing it off of what it's trained on. So if there's something in the training that's leading it to use different statements or different jargon, may not be the right fit. The training may be inadequate or misaligned with the use case. So what we saw here was a system that was trained on a wide array of information that's just out there in the internet. You may need to develop something that has a more weighted training on clinical trial information and even specifically clinical trial lay summaries, so that it's producing outputs that are more aligned with this specific use case. That's very important. So you're getting the actual content that you really need. There's also the risk, the human element. If a system is, accurately or seemingly accurately and consistently putting out this information, things may get overlooked as well. So it's important to keep in mind a good QC review process to ensure, that this information is indeed accurate and appropriate. Readability and understandability, again, you could use it as a crutch a little bit. You might be tempted to do so, but understandability is a very important element of these documents and shouldn't be taken lightly. It should be looked at very carefully. And then, of course, language translations, cultural considerations, the way certain terms are phrased may need to be translated differently with the clinical context in mind. And so what's the writer's role in all of this? It's still very, very comprehensive. So reviewing and revising that AI-generated text, reviewing for the appropriateness of graphics, visual aids, ensuring understandability, ensuring that the document is going to be accessible, reviewing the best practice adherence, facilitating the process, review process, including the lay panel when that's in scope, guiding the translation process, final approval, and initiating the distribution. So the writer still has a very, very sort of broad and important role in this entire process. Some people kind of think, oh, AI is going to just take over and start composing these documents. I don't think that's anytime soon. But it does have a role as a tool to help facilitate this to facilitate this process. So, key takeaways. Consider this to be a tool, an enhancement to existing tools that are out there that can help make this a more efficient, accurate, and consistent approach to writing documents. There's multiple forms of AI. There's different implementation strategies. So depending on what's the most effective and impactful approach, you may do one or the other or take different approaches. And it's important to understand really what's under the hood. What are the concerns with this potential approach versus this one? What do we need to mitigate for? And what might be more beneficial? What's evolving? What are the new things coming around the corner? Are they ready for prime time, or do they still need some time? Are there other approaches that have also evolved that you may need to implement? So these are important things to consider. And then it provides the opportunity to assist in many different ways, maybe a handful of them, maybe all of them. Summarizing the graphics, populating text, applying terms, generating and even writing text itself. So, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this with you. Like I said, I think it's pretty cool, pretty exciting. Hopefully you guys too. Any questions?
Hi, Zach. We actually have a question from our virtual audience.
Sure.
So Deborah asks, are there efforts to use AI to generate optimized AI prompts?
That's a good question. Not that I'm aware of, but yeah, that certainly could. There could be a role there for that. Good point. Good thought.
Anyone else?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Emilio Blasquez from BMS. So I understand that you can adapt AI in the process, like you can use it for different parts of the process.
Yep.
So like in your experience, what would be approximately like the percentage of AI versus the human involvement in the process?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really is kind of a gradual sort of slope. I mean, I think if you're going for maybe 50% to get started on that first draft, I'd say that's pretty good. That's about what you're aiming for. You're doing some of the more basic things initially, like creating the table to begin with, inserting data into your document. You're getting the writer to a point where half of that draft is constructed, and now it's fill in the blanks with the text and with the elements that really at this point really still need a human to look at and write. And that's probably about 50% of that first draft, where you're kind of gathering the data and getting a good starting point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, this is Sharan from Zero8. So you've explained the problems with generative AI and the sort of false things that it could potentially create, right?
Yep.
So what is the alternative to train this sort of AI? Do you use like a supervised learning method where you have like a data set of input documents and like a target PLS kind of thing per data point?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of probably the best method to make sure that it's not kind of creating those leaps and jumps and learns from maybe false statements that it makes and improve it that way.
Right. So this kind of a data set, if it's curated from the public domain, right, or wherever you would find it, because this data set has to be large enough, right?
Yep.
So how would you deal with this sort of mixture of experts, because plain doesn't mean plain to everyone, right? As you've explained right now.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of there's an order of plain going on in plain language summary itself. So would it collapse to sort of a mode of plain in this distribution?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. That's always the challenge, right? Getting enough data to really train it adequately. It's the kind of thing sort of need to build as time goes on, right? The more and more that you're able to put in there, the better the training is gonna be. Yeah, so certainly a challenge when you have limited information out there, especially if you're trying to do a supervised training method. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. So I do think there's probably different maybe strategies that you could augment it with to make it a little bit more accurate over time. But that's a very good point.
Right, and so I just one last one. So do you have like a heuristic metric to quantify, plane, because it's an order in the end, right? And then you could sort of build on top of that.
Yeah, potentially.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi there, really interesting talk. I'm Rebecca Lee from Vivly. So ChatGPT is an obvious tool, but do you have others that you have tried? And then a second follow-up question is, do you import the lay language glossary into your tools as you move forward?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thanks. Yeah, there are other tools out there that are probably more appropriate. ChatGPT is just more of a topical one, obviously, but yeah, there's plenty of other similar ones that either both use the same sort of base as ChatGPT or use a separate one altogether. I think we're still kind of, and even ones they're developing that are specific to the life sciences as well. So to answer your question, yeah, we're continuing to explore and see what really is going to be the best one for this approach. I think the jury is definitely still out on that. And then, sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Do you import the
right.
language,
Yes.
plain language glossary to train it?
Yep. Yeah, and you could, I'd recommend having a setup there where you can even configure what your particular lay versions of things might be, because I know there's some standards out there, but some organizations might have different preferences. So that's an important thing that it really should be probably configurable at that organization level, so you can, every time you want to say headache, it's going to be headache or something like that. But yeah, that could be definitely embedded into the training algorithm. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
It's starting to get traction. It's definitely newer, but yeah, it's starting to generate interest. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I won't hold you hostage anymore. Enjoy your lunch, everyone, and thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.